Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should.
Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with legendary live sound engineer David Morgan. Let's get right back into it and hear some more stories about his amazing career.
When I was briefly at ABC, Brian Inglesby, who was the chief engineer at the time, was a legendary engineer, taught me two things. Anytime you use an equalizer, take out what you hate. Don't add what you want.
As opposed to adding more, yeah.
Yeah, cut only, take out what you hate.
Yep.
And he, as far as effects go, he says, turn it up until you can hear it, and then turn it down 2 or 3 dB.
And that, I think, is, that's what we learned in terms of learning how to use reverb and EQ and everything else. Just go a little bit past where it starts to sound good, and then come back.
Well, those 2 pieces of advice are basically my career. Right? I've never gotten better advice from anyone than those 2 things. It was like, the moment in The Jerk when Nathan Johnson was leaving home. It was it was those 2 things were I've never ever forgotten them. And how cool Brian was to be around as well. He was a great teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I really wanted to be part of the digital age. And so literally I embraced everything that came out, tried it out, and put on the pair of pants and see if the shirt fit. And if it was a tool that I could use, then yes, I immediately went into my rack. PCM 60s became really, really popular. As soon as I figured out how to the button combinations to get the cool sounds out of it. And
the secret button press.
Yeah,
Yes.
the secret button stuff. Yeah. Well, see, that's why I love digital so much. Is that and so it's it became part of my routine when I was off the road, was to go in and listen to cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And does this have any spot in my world? By the time we evolved to Graceland, right, I had this incredibly complex setup. We had to have 2 RMX 16 reverbs that I had to program by hand because they had no.
Right, they didn't have any memory or anything.
Yeah. It's just the faceplate, right? So those things I'd be furiously changing in between songs.
Did you use the grease pencil on the dials to mark your spots and everything?
No, I memorize all this shit. I mean, like I said, I choreograph everything. I memorize all this stuff.
Well, I'm just thinking back to the days when snapshot automation was literally us taking a Polaroid.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Of the console. Yeah. Or having a blank piece of paper that you've drawn circles on with a compass, and then you put it through, making 100 copies of it and do your console.
In fact, at one point at Paramount, we had one of the graphics people just draw up the front panels of a few of the rack gear items. Mm-hmm. Like the 160X, for example.
Sure.
Because people got tired of constantly coming in and having to erase the grease pencil mark from somebody else's last session.
Right.
Because that's the way you remembered stuff. Yeah.
Or you'd look at a 160X and you'd see a red stripe, a yellow stripe, a blue stripe, a white stripe.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was, I've always been really inquisitive, and so when digital came around, it was, it was, first of all, can this work? But then again, immediately apparent was, oh my God, this definitely does work, but you got to do this.
Yeah.
Another, when the special keys upgrade came out on the Black 224, that was a wonderful day when you could do the funny programs on that too. Mm-hmm. And so I became addicted to them. My first introduction might have been on to digital control was there was a company that made spring reverbs called Mic Mix.
I remember them.
But they had a digital controller for their reverb spring.
Yep.
Right. And so I had one of those on the Doobie Brothers. I think I might have had a couple of them. I had 2 reverbs, and one of them might have been a BX20 though. But and that was a long time ago.
That's too funny, man.
We're talking over 40 years ago. So but we used to fly the Mic Mix, the tank on, and so it didn't
to keep it from getting vibrations from the stage and everything.
Yeah, and or somebody walking into it,
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. So
that would have been horrendous noise through the PA. Yeah.
No, it used to fly upstage center, and so it was kind of an accident of my age, of being in the right place at the right time to experience this stuff, and to have the real necessity of finding something that made my life easier while I'm mixing a really complex Paul Simon show on the big console. I really needed something to help me do ancillary stuff.
But to your credit, there are a lot of guys who are even younger than you who not only didn't embrace digital, but really kind of held it at arm's length for a long time because of the dependability factor, because of the sonic factor. And, I think you kind of realized early on that these are just tools, and, how is it going to impact not only the sound, but my work? And that's an important thing, I think,
Well, also because I was a club engineer, and the guy in the band who owned the PA and the mixer head and stuff and half the instruments, it was incumbent on me to really find good solutions. And the digital had so many pros to it that I was determined to make it work. And it answered so many of the questions that I had about, how can I clean up what's coming from this corner of the stage, and because my singer doesn't put a lot into his vocal microphone and he plays the guitar really lightly, right? And so I really did need to automate the on and off function, and it was something I didn't want to do with mute buttons. But I held on to that analog main console until I guess the last tour I did on a PM5000 with a DM2000 as the sidecar board was probably in 2006. Right?
Well, that's about the time that I think digital really started coming into its own too, with the venue and stuff like that. That made a big difference, and there really was sort of a chasm that we crossed where digital became very viable, and a lot more people all of a sudden got on that bus.
I had my hand slightly forced because in 2006, James wanted to go out on a concept that he called one-man band, which was just James and Larry Goldings, our piano player. And I guess Larry was the one-man band. And we were going to do theaters. So we weren't going to do sheds for 15,000 people. And we weren't going to do arenas for 10,000 people. We were going to do 2,000 people in theaters. Well, it was communicated to me was that James didn't want to take out a lot of seats because there was a limited number of seats in theaters. He wanted everybody to be able to have the opportunity. So
you needed that small footprint.
So I was faced with goodbye to the huge racks of outboard gear, goodbye to the PM5000.
Right.
And so we started off on a PM5D and nothing else. That was it. Just going with what was
just
on
the onboard effects on the PM5D.
And it's always been my opinion that it's my job to make whatever I'm mixing on sound good. It's not I'm not getting paid to do a mediocre job on a console I'm not familiar with. I'm being paid to do an excellent job on whatever I'm given. And so I beat up that 5D as much as I possibly could. And we did good shows. We did really good shows, but there was something I just still wasn't getting out of it. And so I had the opportunity to be introduced to the Profile, and it was even smaller than the 5D. But it had this wonderful thing on it called plugins. and I went, I get to use TDM plugins? And the light went on.
I get to use all this cool Pro Tools stuff. Yeah.
And I said, if I'm going in the box, I'm going all the way in the box. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't bring anything up with me on One Man Band for the following year and a half, other than the Profile. That was it. Everything was done on plugins. Mm-hmm. So when I jumped in the box, I jumped in with both feet and reached up and closed the lid behind me. And I've stayed there ever since. I don't bring outboard gear with me except for reverbs. That's the one thing I found in plug-in land, that I just don't get the incredible complexity and bit depth out of plugins that I can out of. I carry a TC6000. Mm-hmm. I have 4 stereo engines in it. I carry a Bricasti.
It's interesting though, because most people who embrace digital, the biggest complaint, well, maybe not complaint, but most people who embrace digital, they carry an analog front end, and then into the console, like, a nice preamp or something like that.
Yeah, but then you go, well, it all depends on where you go in the console, but then you're at the mercy of their buffer amps, which weren't so good back then. If you went, through a patch point, right? And if you went through an input, you still had to go through their converters.
Right.
So what difference does it make? And I mean, I've had this discussion with a lot of people. If no one ever said to me on James Taylor shows, the show doesn't sound as good as it used to when you were on the analog console. No one has ever said that to me. And so once again, I go back to the statement that I made a few minutes ago. If your job description is front of house mixing engineer, your job is to make whatever you're working on sound as good as it possibly can.
Sure.
So I just take it as a personal challenge and an artistic challenge to find I might use a plug-in that somebody would say, oh no, that's a bus compressor on it. And why are you using it on a vocal? Because it sounds good. It sounds right. And the first thing I do when I audition a plugin is I listen to it, what it sounds like when the compression is out. Say we're listening to a compressor. I'll dial out the compression. I just want to hear what it sounds like going through the circuit.
Right? Just how the circuit colors the sound.
Yeah, exactly. And I can tell you within a second or two whether or not a particular plugin is going to work. And so when I'm at rehearsals, I'll just jam through plugins. I'll on my, I use Waves on the SD5, and I'll just load up a spot with 4 plugins, right, and just bang through them. Mm-hmm. And if those don't work, I'll throw them out and put 4 more in, right, and I'll listen until I get exactly what I'm trying to find, the quality that I'm trying to find. Because as I said, you have to have a goal in mind. Right.
Sure.
Everything has to be satisfying particular parameters that end up having a cohesive mix. Right. So it's not enough for just an input to sound good by itself. It's got to sound good with its buddies. Right.
Well, and that's just part of it. A lot of people, they get very, very mired in the weeds of this particular plugin doesn't sound good, or this particular thing doesn't sound right, and ultimately, as I said earlier, it comes down to we're doing it all for the sake of the song, for the sake of the performance, and if it works in the overall big picture, then that's what we're really going after more than anything else, right? I mean, you want to create a great show. You don't want to create just, James's vocal sounded really great. No, it's like James's vocal sounded great in the context of the entire song and performance.
Absolutely, and that was one of the first things that was communicated to me by management when I took on the James Taylor job was, you know, not only does James Taylor sound like James Taylor, his guitar sounds like his guitar, and the band sounds we can hear everything that's being played.
Sure.
And so that I mean, I used this analogy years ago in a magazine article in an interview that was done, but literally the console is my keyboard. Mm-hmm. and the band is the instruments on the and that's my approach to mixing, is that I'm literally playing the band for the audience, and it's a wonderful challenge every night to be able to bring everything to where it belongs in a particular song, and yet be able to pick out the individual parts very easily. And the best thing that anyone can say to me after a show was, I could hear everything.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And when we were this last Fleetwood Mac tour, I had so much fun mixing Mick and Taco Hirano, you know, as the drum section. And, you know, and Taco would tell me with regularity, he says, you know, people say that they can hear every single thing coming off the percussion rig. And I said, well, first thing we have to do is thank Earthworks microphones, you know, because the vast majority of mics that we were using on Taco's rig were Earthworks, as they are with Luis Conti on James Taylor. But you know, we go from console to mic choice and mic placement, you know, and the two are so inextricably linked.
Sure. Absolutely. I learned that from Peter Asher, in fact.
Absolutely. And it's not enough just to have the desk in front of you as part of your vision. You have to create the environment on the stage as well. And so the world of a front of house person is very large, you know, within the arena in which you're playing. And it's a job that I've taken really quite seriously, but I've had an awful lot of fun doing.
And you've been doing it for quite a while, so, you know, you must be getting good at it by now, huh?
Yeah, 40 plus years now. Yeah, it's at 71. It's kind of fun to look back at where I come from, but there are still places that I want to go, and I've told James that I'll come back next year when the business comes back, and I want to keep working for Stevie, because mm-hmm. she's as wonderful as she can be. She's everything you think she is. She's just a absolutely astounding human being. She's a incredible survivor and standard bearer, and in addition to being so immensely talented, she's a tough, in the best sense of the word, woman. You know, she's very strong. She knows
what she's been through. I mean,
she knows where she's going. She knows what she wants. And the wonderful thing is, she knows that I'm giving it to the audience. Mm-hmm. And to have her confidence is an incredible blessing. And I can't thank her enough for making me part of the team here at the end of my career. I had worked for her first show I mixed for her was in 2005, and I stayed with her for the next 4 years or so. Mm-hmm. But when Fleetwood Mac went out in 2009, I was in Vegas doing Bet and Share, and I thank goodness Dave Cobb was available to do it and did an excellent job. And Cobby was a wonderful engineer.
Oh yeah.
Our industry owes a tremendous debt of gratitude to Dave Cobb, and I hope he's enjoying retirement. And it's someplace that I actually hope to be someday myself.
Well, he's another one that I actually want to contact and get on this show. So
absolutely brilliant, man. The 2K guys there at Claire, Trip Califf and Dave Cobb, are just so important to our industry and gave so much and raised the level of performance, so raised the bar so high. And yet while we were in competition for the gigs, we were never in competition with each other. We were in basic admiration of each other. And
you guys have all three of you have remarkably different styles in that sense, which is, and that in and of itself, because to a certain extent, a front of house mixer should have no sound of their own. You should be able to make the artists sound like what they sound like.
Exactly. No, you have to be true to the performance, and you don't impose your will on it.
Right.
Exactly the opposite. You try to be as clear a pane of glass as you can possibly be.
Exactly.
A lot of people don't understand how many effects it takes to make that glass be clear, or the number of plugins, or the number of outboard compressors and stuff.
That's the irony of it. Yeah.
Well, it's to a certain extent, you want to have the engineer to have an invisible hand, and the best thing that I can do is not be noticed at all. The very best thing I can do is to watch the smiles on people's faces as they're walking out of the building after a show, because I'm doing it for them,
Sure.
And I'm an advertisement for the next tour, so's the lighting guy.
Yeah.
So's the video people. We're not just doing that show. We're trying to get you to come back and buy a ticket for the next tour, so I have a job next year. So I take that mission very seriously.
Well, and especially because, as you say, I mean, you're entrusted by the artist to be that pane of glass, and that pane of glass is really, it's so important that you maintain a certain invisibleness, so to speak. And yet, you're, as you say, you're working so hard to maintain that.
Well, you're allowed to tint it. You're not allowed to color it.
Yeah.
Right. You're not allowed to make it opaque, and decide, I'm going to have this rock drum sound on, a very delicate performance by, say, Fiona Apple.
Yeah.
It's just, you have to understand where you are and why you're there. You're not there to show what a great engineer you are.
And particularly because a lot of the artists that you work with, I mean, you're not playing with a lot of tracks and stuff. I mean, you're playing with all real players, and that again makes a difference because you're being given a certain raw material, and it's what you do with that raw material that makes the difference of whether or not it still sounds genuine.
Oh, absolutely. It's a difficult trail to walk down the middle of to keep your ego out of the mix.
Sure. And
because it's easy to fall back into a place of complacency, and in describing myself, I would call it laziness, of not pushing yourself to a position of greater understanding, where you actually keep the performance as the paramount thing that determines all your decisions from the first day of rehearsal. And there couldn't be a much greater contrast in performance than Bette Midler and Steely Dan. But I approach each with basically the same methodology, is that what's being generated on the stage is far more important than my opinion of what's being generated on the stage. And let's take this opinion and we'll put it into the front of house workbox and we'll close the lid. And once again, I've tried very hard not to work for, or to avoid working for bands whose music I don't care about. And I really, for my particular way of mixing or approaching assembling a show, I need the emotional involvement. Mm-hmm. And it's my motivation. It's my, it's my guide. It's my way of setting overall goals. And none of them have to do with the fact that I'm using my favorite microphone or something, or if I'm using my favorite plugin. Everything has to do with the fact that this guitar sound would sound better in this way of processing versus that way of processing.
Sure. And your favorite microphone for one person will not be your favorite microphone for another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's very few things that are constant. I mean, you couldn't have much more difference between Steve Gadd's mic kit and Mick Fleetwood's mic kit, right? There wasn't a single microphone in common, right? Mick was all dynamics except for the overheads, and it was and Steve is all condensers.
Well, and I mean, styles completely different and kits completely different. I mean, of course, you're going to make a different choice there. Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. I mean, even back in the days when I started using SM87s, SM98s on toms when they first came out. When Harold Blumberg handed me a whole bunch of microphones and said, we're using these on the horns on Chicago. What do you think they'll do on Whitney? Well, they went on the drums. And that led to, there's an ad way back in the archives of Shure of me leaning over a drum kit. And it's called How I Mic Drums. And there's the SM98.
And I used those 98s on a lot of recordings on toms too, because they just sound wonderful on drums,
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But they didn't sound perfect on every single drum kit.
I could imagine that on Mick Fleetwood, they might not work because he's a very heavy hitter.
421s, bro. 421s.
Yep.
Let's go with tried and true technology.
Exactly.
57 on snare top. Yeah. 201 on the snare bottom. And it was glorious. It was absolutely glorious. Uh-huh. And so it was, KM84 on the hi-hat, it's just textbook stuff from the 70s.
Yeah.
And God, those drums sounded good. Mick is such an amazing player.
Well, yeah, again, you start off with great raw material and, you really have to work to make it sound bad, Yeah,
but it could have if we had not decided to go, to stay in 70s technology. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because, while the quality of mics has continued to improve and the applicability of microphones to a live situation has continued to improve, sometimes a 421 is the right answer.
Absolutely. Sometimes a 57 is the best thing you can use.
Absolutely. So it's good to have the kind of length of career that I have, because I started out with Unidynes, and where everything on stage was a Unidyne or a Unisphere, right?
Right.
And so it's good to have that in your toolbox. That sort of historical appreciation for an old EV was 661 was the old kick drum mic, was it?
Oh God, yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's there are certain things that still work.
Just work, yeah.
Yeah. Why we all loved the original D12s and didn't like the E's so much, and then never liked the D112 at all.
Football, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at all.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of nuance in there to be able to understand why the old original D12 was so incredible and why what came after it weren't. And so you don't pick a mic based on looks. I saw this on somebody's kick drum on TV. I'm gonna put it out there. So I'm blessed with having the history of being able to go back into the '60s like that and understand what made this particular piece of equipment work. Because, as I said, I'm a naturally inquisitive person, and when I was first in bands and in recording studios, I'd say, what is that it looks like it's on my guitar? Because I look over and see a compressor meter responding to the notes that I was playing on the guitar. And I say, is that on my guitar, and why? And what are you doing? And what are all these knobs on the equalizers? Don't you just have high and low? And so aside from saying yes in one's career, one must also be inquisitive enough and bold enough to ask questions. Absolutely. And to admit that you don't know anything. There's nothing wrong with admitting ignorance as long as you're willing to do something about the condition, right?
Exactly. And if you have the opportunity to ask those questions, absolutely. Well, and that brings me to my last question for you, because I know that you do a lot of educating and a lot of writing, writing columns for magazines and, just basically sort of helping the next generation to understand. What kind of advice, what one piece of advice would you have for somebody coming into doing live sound now in this era?
Well, I would suggest some of the old things are still apply. Learning the various timbres of real instruments is even though we're in a digital age where you just call up a sample of an instrument, you still have to understand where that digital emulation came from, right? And I think ear training on frequencies is always going to be important. You really have to know that if something is amiss at front of house or even on stage, I'm not going to say, oh, that's 5.8K, unless I actually know it, because nothing makes you look more like an idiot than calling out a frequency and having it be 2 octaves below, Mm-hmm. And so those two basics are always going to be important. But the biggest piece of advice I would give any front of house engineer is spend the first 3 days of rehearsal away from your console, sitting on stage with the musicians.
Amen. Because that's, that I think is one of the most overlooked things, especially like in a lot of the recording schools and tech schools that students go to now, is the understanding of the artist and the interchange with the artist, the psychology of working with people. I think that's got to be key to longevity in a career.
I've found that it's absolutely invaluable to go find a little sweet spot in the rehearsal room. And for me, it's quite often one of the downstage corners of the drum riser, right? Mm-hmm. Usually it's on the stage right side, so I'm away from the snare drum. But you just find there's always a spot on the stage where you can actually hear everything, right? And so if you take a little time, stroll around the stage and make believe you're looking at microphones or something, and because otherwise people are going to say, well, hey, front of house guy, get off the stage. You find a little spot and listen to what the band thinks they sound like, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're going to tell you right away. Is once you have that concept in your mind, then you're able to go out front and start manipulating, right? Or creating. And this goes back to, once again, you always have to have a goal in mind. Doing things randomly ends up sounding random. Doing things purposefully ends up sounding finished. And so that for that reason, I will sit there and do nothing for hours at a time, you know. And if someone says, "Aren't you supposed to be out there?" I said, "No, I belong right here for right now." And Paul got really used to seeing me sitting in between Steve Gadd and Bagiti Kamala, you know, and it works with every band. You know, you really have to know what they think they are playing on their in their performance venue on the stage, and it also helps me find the symbiosis with the monitor person as well. You know, I listen to what's coming out of the wedges and see if there's anything that I need to do as far as compensatory EQ out front. You know, if somebody's got a really loud wedge and it's right underneath one of my microphones, I got to know about that, you know?
Sure.
And so then you have to work with the monitor engineer and say, look, I really need this mic to be a little more pristine. Is there any chance that we can move this monitor 6 inches this way or whatever? But, you know, and that's all part of the teamwork as well. You know,
well, don't you also get a good feel just sitting up there about the interplay between the musicians, their personalities and stuff too? That's got to be valuable.
And you'll hear things that you would hear if you're bringing up mics one by one. Sure. You know, you're going to miss stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the subtlety is in making the particular composite that you're building include all the strands, and that's one of the wonderful things that being able to record a multi-track of the show every night has been incredibly productive as far as bringing the strands all together. You know, if you sit there and listen to one instrument soloed all the way through a song, without the band playing, right? Yeah. If you sitting out in front of the house, a pair of headphones listening to, what is he playing? Why do I not? There's something I'm not hearing. I got to, and I don't do virtual sound checks. I really encourage bands to do sound checks because I want them to feel comfortable in their performance space, right? Sure. And I also want them to have no surprises, you know. So I'll always encourage a sound check, and I've had almost every artist I've worked with who does sound checks. And as you said, I only work for artists who actually play the shows live. So so sound checks are really a necessity. And I mean, and that's been a conscious decision too. I do not belong on a playback show. That's much like I didn't belong working behind a desk, and I didn't belong in a recording studio. I'm not the guy to mix a playback show. I'm just I'm gonna lose interest immediately.
Well, and I think part of that is because you are sensitive not only to the instrumentation, but to the chemistry between the players.
Exactly. And it just breaks my heart to know that somebody's on stage playing a great show and it's not being heard out front.
Yeah,
you know? In favor of our pre-recorded tracks that we're absolutely dependent on. And I've only had one experience when I was asked to do that, and after a week, it was mutually agreed that I was not the right guy to mix that show. You know, so that
fair enough.
No, I not saying it doesn't work for some artists, but for me, you know, we had some tracks recorded for Cher on doing her thing, but that was like Sonny. You know, Sonny would sing on pre-recorded tracks when we did "I Got You, Babe" and stuff. You know, and so that you know, but the show was never. We had 16 channels of Pro Tools, and maybe one or two of those tracks was running during a song, so we could add a certain element that we we didn't have being played on stage.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, Paul Merkovich was the musical director for Cher back then, and he did such a marvelous job of with a small band. We had, you know, 2 keyboard players, a guitar player, drummer, bass, and 2 backup singers. That was that. It was a small show. You know?
Yeah.
And then we had our 16 tracks of Pro Tools that you know, we'd have, you know, dialogue with Sonny and you know, all of her comedy stuff we'd put on comedy stuff while she was doing costume changes, because you know, she had like several hundred during the show, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what that playback was used for at that show. But the show was being played by the musicians on the stage.
Yeah.
And for me, that's necessary. I just need that level of involvement. If it's a playback thing, I become detached and bored.
Well, and I think that's really, you know, that's so important. As I said, you know, the chemistry between the players, to me, that's, you know, that's what makes the music, you know, that whole interaction between players. I mean, you know, you've talked about some great drummers and percussionists and how they work together. I mean, you know, that's the difference between everybody just going, you know, gangbusters all playing at once versus people really understanding, I'm going to lay back here, I'm going to lay out in this part, you're going to play this part. You know, that's an organic approach to music that I think really is what makes a classic performance.
In 1973, I organized and played in the only reggae band in the United States at the time. And I had gone to see Jimmy Cliff's movie, The Harder They Come. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely marvelous movie.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And when I was walking home from seeing it the first time, with my girlfriend and I were walking back to our apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'm saying to her, you know, there's nothing really to it. You know, it's just 3 chords. It's just, you know, it's just simple stuff. And I'm walking along and all of a sudden things start popping off in my head. And I break into singing, You Can Get It If You Really Want. And I'm trying to figure out the accent, all the different accents in the measure and where they come from. And by the time we finished the walk home, I looked over at April, my girlfriend, and I said, it's a fucking machine. And she said, what do you mean? I said, the reggae band is a machine. Everybody has their own little thing, whether it's the, or the, you know, the bass providing the downbeat, and everybody's got to hold up their end of the machine. And at that point I said, we got to start one of these bands. So I put an ad in the local newspaper and found some Jamaican musicians who wanted to start a band. And so, to make a long story short, we ended up being the backing band for Toots and the Maytals the first time they came to the United States in 1973.
Uh-huh.
So before we played our first show for Toots, we assembled backstage, and Toots got us all together like a football coach, you know, and got into a circle, and he started talking about the love and how everything was about the love, and how we were Ja's vehicle for projecting the love. And it resonated with me so deeply that it's been the cornerstone of my career. That little experience of being part of a machine where you have to put your ego aside, right? And, you know, I'm playing pressure drop and I'm going da 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 da. I can't vary from that. I have to play those notes in every single measure.
Because if you don't, that part will not be there. Yes.
Yeah, and the song won't work.
Right. You're a cog in a machine. Yeah.
And so being in a reggae band was a wonderful teacher as far as, you know, lowering the threshold on your ego, you know? Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, the lesson of being in that band, and we stayed together as the band and played as a band called Jamaica Hilton for a while after that. we came this close to getting signed. But as it happened in all of the bands that I played in, we got this close and then it just never made it, whether we got signed or not. We just,
I know that story all too well.
Yeah. I mean, we always used to think getting signed was the thing, but we never realized that you had to sell records too,
And many of us are very fortunate that we didn't get signed.
Yeah, well, yeah. Even in the occasions that it had, that particular door was open for me, we didn't have the material to walk through it, Mm-hmm. So it was. But that whole thing of us being, it made me understand that live concerts have really taken the place of going to church. It's the spirituality of people all together for a shared experience is really only the uplifting part of it really only happens at rock shows these days. Most people are pretty neutral about when it comes to going to church. There are certain exceptions, but obviously with church attendance a hundredth of what it used to be. Something had to fill the void, and basically rock shows are what has filled the void.
Well, it's the same exchange of energy in a way.
Yes, exactly, and commonality of experience.
Yeah.
And so, if I'm the vehicle of the love, then I have to do my job.
Yeah.
And that's been my motivator since I was in my early 20s, and Toots Hibbert was yelling it in my ear, What a great singer he was. Oh my God. We just lost him too. He just passed away.
Yeah. It's been a hell of a year.
Yeah. Yeah. But what a voice. And he and Bob Marley were the architects of reggae.
Yeah.
And to be able to play on stage with that guy, it was, I can't tell you how much fun it was. We're just like beaming all the way through the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine. Yeah. You've had quite the career. That's for sure.
It's been an experience. I can say that. And it's been, for the most part, it's been a very positive experience. And I've gotten to see the world and to be a part of a movement that began in my childhood, and I got in at the beginning, and I haven't been chewed up and spit out yet. So I'm just really grateful that I'm still here and have the opportunity to perform my craft and at a level that doesn't seem to have diminished too much yet. So I'm really hoping I can hang out for a couple, 3 more years. I'm thinking 75 is a good goal to retire.
Yeah, I think by then you may actually have it down. Who knows?
Practice.
David Morgan, thank you for being my guest.
Absolute pleasure, my friend.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.